Okay, welcome everybody to our December 2021 Masterclass for Crisis Communication, sponsored by Situation Hub. My name is Gerard Braud. As we wrap up 2021, our goal today is to look back at lessons from 2021 and help you do some planning for 2022. Some of you will be planning for yourselves. Many of you run public relations agencies yourself, and you'll be planning for your clients. So we're going to give you lots of tips to work with. But just to put things into perspective for you of what type of a month and week we are in. We've had 200-mile-long tornadoes sweep through Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri. There is a massive cyber attack underway. High winds ripped across Colorado and Kansas last night, some heading into Missouri and other states, with winds moving into Minneapolis area, Minnesota. Where I'm sitting right now, I got hit by the 5th strongest hurricane ever to hit the United States this year, Hurricane Ida. And we still have lots of people who are completely homeless from that. Just last week, we had floods in the Pacific Northwest. This morning, Urban Meyer, football coach, was fired for allegedly abusing one of his players by kicking him. And the Omicron COVID virus is about ready to wreck Christmas. Doesn't that sound cheerful? So I read that list to you because one of the things that we all have to struggle with in our careers is trying to get the people around us to recognize that a crisis can hit anytime without warning. And so many organizations kick the can down the road. So many people won't spend a dime to do any work on crisis communications. Some people, some organizations, some leaders won't give you the time to do what you need to do. So we're going to look at some of the best practices that you can employ so that you can try to build a strategy, try to build a toolkit, try to learn from 2021 and plan for 2022. So with that, I am going to share my screen and go through a couple of slides, a couple of housekeeping things. Here's who we've got on the agenda today. Melissa Agnes is going to join us. Bill Coletti is going to join us, and Molly McPherson will be on the agenda today. My name is Gerard Braud. I know some of you haven't been on this program with us before for this master class because you're either a friend of Molly's or Melissa or Bill's. So if we're meeting for the first time, nice to meet you. From 1979 to 1994, I was a working journalist, mostly in television, and a lot of my crisis communications beliefs and practices were built off of mistakes I saw everybody make every day of my life for a 15-year career in the news. In 1994, I set out on my own. Since then, I have been a trainer, doing media training, teaching people how to write crisis communications plans, doing drills, that sort of thing. I speak at conferences. I'm an author of the book, Don't Talk to the Media Until. And in 2020, I launched and founded the company Situation Hub, which is sponsoring this. Our first live guest today is going to be Bill Coletti. Bill is a reputation management strategist. He's the CEO and founder of the Kith firm. He's also a C-suite advisor. I didn't know you were doing that, Bill. He, like me, is a keynote speaker, and he is the author of the book, Critical Moments. Your other guest will be Molly McPherson. She'll be joining us by videotape. She, too, is a keynote speaker. She's founder of the Indestructible PR firm. She practices public relations, crisis communications, online reputation management. She has her own podcast, and she is the author of the book, Indestructible. And then also joining us by videotape will be Melissa Agnes. She is founder and CEO of the Crisis Ready Institute. She practices crisis management strategies. She is the author of the book, Crisis Ready, and she too is a keynote speaker. So you've got 4 keynote speakers and 4 authors that you can deal with. Our objective every month when we get together here is to simply share best practices, to do some higher level thinking, and to establish a learning community. Some of the people on this call use Situation Hub, some never will use Situation Hub. That's okay. I just want us all to get together once a month and share best practices. The next thing to recognize is that as we approach everything in here, we want to approach it like we approach buying an umbrella, with the belief that crisis communications is like an umbrella. You do not buy an umbrella because you hope it rains today. You buy and own an umbrella in case your sunny day turns stormy. As we talk about crises today, the definition that I always use is any situation that has the ability to negatively affect your revenue, reputation, and brand needs to be treated like a crisis. Doesn't mean you put out a news statement, doesn't mean you call a news conference, but you treat it with that critical importance. Often it means doing all the steps that you need to do and preparing a statement, and you stop maybe just short of sending it out, but nonetheless, you have done the work that it takes to get there. And if you do need to go public, you know how to get that statement out to the world. And as we look at everything, I always look at all crises through the lens of the 5 steps to effective crisis communications, which is your need to always do vulnerability assessments at least once a month these days, to make sure you have a crisis plan in place that works, that is battle tested. Make sure you have pre-written statements written, and that is what the Situation Hub app does. It actually combines crisis communications plans with the ability to write a statement in 2 to 5 minutes. The next thing you need to do is always make sure you're training your spokespeople, and then that you're doing drills so that you're testing your plan, testing your spokespeople, testing your pre-written messages, testing your team, testing all those elements. And with that, let's bring in Bill Coletti. I said before, Bill is the CEO and founder of the KITH organization. And Bill, our question that we're asking everybody who is a guest today is, as you look back on 2021 and look ahead to 2022, what is your number one crisis takeaway that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, Jared, awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. You know, it's intended to be provocative. It is that don't forget that COVID changed everything. I think it is really, really easy for us that we're in the middle of it now. We've either dealt with work from home or when we're coming back or not coming back. We reorganized our businesses. We counseled and coached our clients. And it feels like kind of been there, done that. But so the key tip that I have coming out of 2021 is that you can't forget that COVID changed everything. And so, you know, by that, what I really think is critical, that I think is most important, is that COVID in and of itself accelerated things that were already happening. And so what I do, and we work with mostly enterprise clients. And so we're looking at macro reputational issues. So it's less about tactics, and it's more about mindset and behavior. Kind of what is the mindset and behavior of the corporations, less about how did we respond to all of those things that you talk about, the hurricane, the force majeure, the weather event, the data breach, the firing of the coach. It's really more about these bigger things. And for us, we are spending time talking about how COVID, and another risk that I'll talk about in a second, how it changed the way we view everything. And the challenge that I need to remind communicators of all the time is that we're in the middle of the forest, and sometimes we lose sight of the trees. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact that COVID did change everything. And this great acceleration that happened is the thing we need to pay attention to. And we need to remind our leaders is that I would venture all of you a year to 18 months ago advised your clients or your company leadership, you've got to get more engaged. You've got to spend more time with your employees. You've got to be more authentic. You've got to tell me, you've got to be okay with leading in uncertainty. And those are really great best practices. I don't want us to forget those. I know some other tips are going to be coming up from some people talking about authenticity and things like that. The lesson learned that I'm taking away is that this great acceleration is changing everything, certainly the way we do business. But more importantly, we can't forget that our leaders still have to remain authentic. Our leaders still have to remain engaged with their employees. All of those behaviors, as they think they're going back to something or some return to normal, which I reject, is that they need to bring those good behaviors forward. And the challenge with that often is with communicators is that we really excel in the moment. Gerard did such a great job of framing this with those handful of crises, and that there are people today in some of those affected states. There's probably people on Urban Meyer's team, and there's people in other places that are figuring out the moment. They're figuring out the talking points. They're figuring out the tactics. They're figuring out the response. And that's great. That's where a lot of us really, really excel. I think for the trend that COVID has taught us, as also Black Lives Matter and social risk year before last, is that we, the communicators, have to become and have to emerge away from being tacticians, and we have to become trusted advisors, and we have to become counselors and coaches and that advisor to our C-suite. And so the second key takeaway from 21 that I'm excited about for 22 is that those of you on this call and those that we work with, is that there is this transition from being firefighting tacticians to actually strategic thinkers that can look back over the arc of COVID, can look back at George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, these macro issues, and can pull them in to level set the reputation and grow and expand reputations. I think what that is the exciting pivot. So the takeaway is COVID changed everything. Don't lose sight of that. Have the discipline to recognize that it has changed everything. You're in the forest, so don't forget to step away and look at those big macro changes that are there. Scott Galloway wrote a great book about this called Post-COVID. So if some of you haven't seen that, so that's a great point. But then more importantly is what COVID taught us as communicators is that being tactical firefighters is our bread and butter, and it's what we are highly appreciated for. I think the expectation of our leadership is something beyond that of coach, counselor, and ultimately trusted advisor. So those are sort of 1 and 2, but 2 embedded key takeaways of what I'm sort of taking away from 21 is to not lose sight of that, and for all of us to level up our game into being in that position of strategist, and tactical firefighting no longer gets it done.
So let me follow up with 2 questions. The first one is going to be about, being that trusted advisor. So many people in PR at every conference you and I have ever gone to will ask the question, how do I get a seat at the table?
It's a great table. I'm curious where the table is, but yes, I'm with you.
One of the things, it's in a back room usually with some bad TVs that don't work and a broken Xerox machine, but that's where the table is. Regardless, one of the things I've always told people is, you want a seat at the table, you go get the seat. You don't ask for the seat, you take the seat. And one of the best ways to do that, I've always advised people, is do that vulnerability assessment at step 1. Walk in with a clipboard to every leader's office and go, hey, I'm working on a crisis communications plan here, and I'm doing some pre-written news releases. Tell me the 10 things that you think could be the most damaging to our revenue, reputation, and brand, and see what they say when you scare the pants off of them. What is your suggestion for getting that seat so that you can be the trusted advisor on a regular basis rather than just on the worst day?
Yeah. So that's a really great one, by the way. So I think doing that, sort of using the what ifs, if you will, the shorthand version of what you just said, using the what ifs is great clarity. I guess I'd take it a little bit deeper to the individual, and to me, it's about mindset and behavior. Too often, I see communicators on crisis situations that we get brought in that bite their tongue. They are fearful to say something. They don't share their perspective. And so for me, and we kind of there's this difference between we're envious of the scientists and those of us that are the artists. We really shouldn't be at that table. And there's this low self-esteem. And so I think it is really about mindset and behavior, is that each of us on this call, you chose to join Gerard on this call to talk about high-level things, to level up your skill sets. You are becoming a craftsman of the things that are important to organizations. And so having the confidence and conviction, you get to that table, yes, by doing some of those things, by being provocative, asking about what if, but the way you get to stay at that table is having the confidence and conviction, the mindset and the behavior to say, I'm not sure I'd do that, Governor, or I'm not sure that's the right approach, as opposed to, thank you, may I have another? And I'm very, very worried about communicators that go in and when the task at hand is write this press release, as opposed to someone saying, are you sure a press release is what we need to do? And I use that as a very 1990s example. But I think the courage and conviction, get to the table. Jared offered great advice on that. Stay at the table by having courage and conviction and confidence in your mindset and the way you hold yourself, that your insights as a communicator, as an ombudsman, as an understander of the zeitgeist of the world is incredibly valuable. And you're not simply there to be a scribe or take notes. That's how you stay at the table. You can bang down the door, you can do what if scenarios, or you can whatever scenario, but you stay there by having confidence that your craft that you are spending the next 59 minutes perfecting, no one else in your organization is doing. And that needs to be demonstrated with the wisdom, expertise, and advice that you give your leadership when the next crisis happens, not how to write a better tweet or how to write a better widget. It's really about more greater perspective. So that's how you stay at the table.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I always go into every room. Of course, you and I get hired to go in and often say what the people in the company can't say. But I always walk into every one of those rooms with the mindset of, I don't care if I get fired today. It's my job to give you the best advice I can do. If you fire me, that's fine. If things go bad, I want the communicator who brought me in to say, hey, Jarrett was horrible, let's fire him. And if everything goes great, then you take all the credit. That's the mindset. Let me give you 2 minutes more before we go to our next guest. And the second question that I want to follow up with you on was denial by leaders. The number of people who don't do what needs to be done and won't empower their people to do what needs to be done. I was dealing with a major hospital group with 150 hospitals around the country at the beginning of COVID. And we could not pry even the middle managers to do anything to prepare for COVID. They ended up just jumping into the fire and taking it one day at a time rather than building the tools they needed. What's your thought on leadership and the denial that many leaders have about the need to prepare?
They shouldn't be leaders.
Technically, they're not leaders. They have a title. We shouldn't confuse a leader with somebody who has a
exactly.
title.
But even the boss's boss or the boss's boss's boss, whatever permutation we are of the org chart, that is a convictable crime, in my opinion, is to not see and think about those things. They are a bad steward of their resource, whether they're for profit or not for profit. So I can spend a lot of time on that soapbox that it is incumbent upon those of us that see those crimes to, if you see something, say something in that situation. So I think that's critical that we do that. However, we do find ourselves in those situations where, pick your metaphor, ostrich with their head in the sand or whatever, parable you want to talk about, that is that it then moves into that mindset and behavior, moves into coaching, is that, I'm not sure that you want your legacy to be the fact that you ignored COVID. I'm not sure that I'd like to understand, what do you really want to achieve? And now let's talk about those next steps on how we're going to get there. So I think it sort of pivots to this sort of coaching construct of how do we actually executive coach and leadership coach. Now, granted, when the barbarians are at the gate and the place is on fire, may or may not be time to do that. But I think that it goes back to what I was saying before, is that it is the responsibility of us as counselors, which I think all of us are in some form or fashion, is that you have to have that confidence and the ability to speak truth to power. And if you see that someone, and I'm going to make sure I didn't miss your theme of your question. I hope to God a hospital system was not, in denial about the importance of COVID. But if they are, I think that is a real opportunity for people like us on this call, the great leaders thinking about these things, to say, Governor, that is wrong, or that is incorrect. Let me show you what this future is going to look like. A lot of tips and tactics on how to articulate that vision. But those are some key takeaways. And gosh, I hope nobody does have that perspective.
Good stuff. All right, stand by. We're going to go to our other guests. Then you and I are going to circle back and look at some things. I do want to take a moment. Jay asked the question, what does a vulnerability assessment look at? Jay, there are two ways that you can do a vulnerability assessment. One is you can take an Excel spreadsheet. He was asking if there was a template. An Excel spreadsheet is where you can begin a template. List every type of crisis you can think of, break them down by smoldering crises and sudden crises. So smoldering crisis might be executive misbehavior or vulnerability in your IT system. It might be sexual harassment. Think of all the natural disasters, all the worker issues, all the facility issues. Make a very long list, and you and I can talk offline if you want to schedule time. I'll go deeper. The other thing to do is to start with a blank slate, bring in a facilitator, and bring people in from every department of the company. And the facilitator will sit everybody at nice round tables, 6 feet apart with mask on. And then each group has a whiteboard, and they whiteboard out or use a chart to map out the things that keep them up at night, the things that could damage their revenue, reputation, and brand. And you grab this massive list, which is probably going to be anywhere from 200 to 500 different items. And then you want to start building pre-written templates to match as many of those as possible and to build a crisis communications plan that can match that. So again, Jay, follow up with me after the class if you want to dig deeper into that. All right, Bill, I want to thank you. We're going to share the slides. Our next two guests are going to join us by videotape, Molly McPherson and Melissa Agnes. So Molly, thanks so much for your time today. And when I called you and I said, Molly, what's your big takeaway for 2021? You didn't even think twice. You said your next crisis will be digital. Dig into that. Tell me what you mean by that, and tell me what our audience needs to do to prepare for their next crisis being digital.
Well, anyone in your audience right now, if they had to think back just from the last quarter, 3 months, maybe even 6 months, about an issue your organization had to deal with, how much of that situation or that issue did not land somewhere digitally, either on your website, in your social media, or your customers or stakeholders commenting on it in a digital format? So any type of planning now for crisis preparation or any critical issue has to have the preparation involve the digital landscape. And it's not just the tech, it's also the mindset of it as well. Many communicators have bought into it. They do it every day. They're dealing with technology, websites, social media. Any of their writing, they know they have to write for online or SEO. But they're also responsible for getting that buy-in from leadership and from people who may not be so conditioned to use it and think of it. So that's why that is my noble cause for 2022 with my clients and my listeners and anyone who I'm speaking to is just to adopt that mindset in their crisis prep for next year.
All right, so let me break this down into 3 things that I really like that you said. You talked about tech, you talked about the mindset, you talked about the leadership. So let's start with tech first. What do people need to do to be prepared on the tech side of things?
I think it's a given right now. Organizations all have websites. Most have Facebook pages unless they're, B2B. But keeping in mind that issues, especially with crisis preparation, there's proactive public relations and reactive. Many organizations are reluctant to get into all these communication channels because they have to manage it. And also they worry about their reputation being out of their hands. But the risk with that is they've also limiting their resources to respond to any type of issue. So use your website also as a portal for any crisis management and response. But maybe just own that one social channel so you can speak to stakeholders who do live in that social world. And that includes, as you know, Jared, your reporters, because reporters are on Twitter. That's their go-to place. I like my clients being on Twitter, even if they're not using it at all times. If something happens, people will go to that account. It doesn't matter if they've only posted 20 times. If you have one important message that's happening during a crisis, that's why you want to be there. And that's what tech is all about.
I agree with you 100%. We did back in the summer a program called the Social Media Conundrum, where we really looked at the Facebook algorithms and how horrible they are actually before it went to Congress. Yeah. And my takeaway also was, if you're going to have a channel, have Twitter. If you're going to have two channels, YouTube, because I like to be able to record a statement and put it up there. But everybody who's watching, I want you to notice she, like I do, makes the homepage or your website your hub. Mm-hmm. Send people to your hub. Mm-hmm. Train them. You know, you've accidentally trained, or so many of our companies have accidentally trained people to go to Facebook for information. You and I both work with a lot of electric co-ops. Facebook is a horrible place. I'm recommending to every one of my clients, take it down. It's not serving any good. Twitter, a reporter will answer a tweet before they answer your phone call or a text or an email.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it also for reporters, in terms of that Facebook comment that you mentioned, mm-hmm. I'm like you, I hate the place, right? But when you need it, and even you mentioned electric cooperatives, many times electric cooperatives and a lot of organizations, their resources are so small, and understanding that a lot of their crises will happen with their members and customers. And if we know over 1 billion people are on Facebook, and that's where the majority, if it's a customer related crisis, you want to keep that channel there because you're speaking to your customer. But absolutely, with reporters, don't even bother with Facebook for reporters, because that's not where they're going.
So where you and I would disagree with that is, what I find on Facebook is the company is trying to get information out so that they can manage expectations.
Yes.
And no comment provides any meaningful information about what to do or how to do it. So it just becomes a place for complainers and anger. And so therefore people get lost in the wormhole of anger and ugly comments, and we lose track of the bigger message. So
yeah. Okay. All right.
So that's, that's where you and I see that slightly different.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, and we won't go on this. It's not so much that we see it different. It's just in our space of what we do with our work, because so much of what I spend time doing is stakeholder activism, where the activism isn't necessarily coming from the reporters. It's coming from your customer base. And that's when you do need to not fight the battle where they are, but you're using your Facebook as your own ammunition, and you can use it in a very methodical way and strategic way. So that's where I think you and I both align, but also I do align with you that Facebook is not the key place to go to manage your reputation, 100%.
So the second thing you mentioned was mindset. Tell me what that mindset needs to be.
Oh my gosh. I'm a huge advocate for communicators, especially ones that have limited resources. And I know one of the challenges that they're frequently run up against is working with leadership that hasn't completely bought in to where communications are happening nowadays. Budgets and policies are still being shaped around a mindset from, the 90s and the 80s. But also communicators are up against an emotion and a feeling, which is fear. Met a lot of leaders out there that don't spend all their time, online and seeing that interaction back and forth. They may be dealing with a board that dismisses social media. And it's not because they're not smart or they don't know what they're doing. It's not where they spend their time. Leaders are leading and managing a business. They're leaving it to the communicators to do that. But understanding that communicators need resources and they need people to accept that the crisis now is going to be a digital crisis. Like I said, right in the beginning, it may not originate online, but it's going to end up online. There is not one crisis or incident happening in the world today that does not pop up or have some type of footprint in the digital space. So all of our communicators need to have resources to be able to respond adequately online.
It's interesting because that's been true for quite some time. And you and I both speak at a lot of conferences and things like this. One of the things I love to do when I have a group of CEOs that I'm talking to is ask the question, how many of you are in Facebook? How many are in Twitter? How many are in LinkedIn? How many are in YouTube? And then I always follow up with the question, how many of you have no idea what I just asked you? And that usually gets like the biggest response in the audience. And it really is hard to get someone to buy into something that they've never used. And I find many people almost put up a wall that says, I'm not going to go into that foolishness, and I'm channeling my dad who was never a digital guy and who was like, that's foolishness. He wouldn't even touch anything after calculators came out. He was a school teacher who thought everybody was going to lose the ability to do math, which is true. But the fact is, if leaders aren't on digital, they really don't understand it. And what I find is it then slows down our crisis response and our post-crisis management, because now they get angry because suddenly they go, well, I found out a whole bunch of things being said ugly about us. It's like, we tried to tell you that 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Couldn't agree more.
So I appreciate you carving out some time for us today. Any final thoughts about where you think people need to go for 2022?
Yeah, the other piece of 2022, I mentioned, the tech and the mindset, but also understanding that a lot of what is driven by our communications is really fueled by younger generations. That's just how it is. Even back in the 60s, when guys had longer hair, eventually the next Beatles wave is coming along. And now our Gen Z, our younger millennials and Gen Z, they're pushing a different type of communication. They want their information and their content snackable. They want it quick. By extension, so do reporters, so do our customers, so do our members. It doesn't mean that we can't give them what they need, but understanding that they're taking it in differently. And sometimes it's not just print. It could be a quick video. It could be audio. It could be podcasts, but understanding that how we consume information is changing. So we have to deliver it in just an additional way. It doesn't mean we have to remove the traditional. I know you and I think alike on this, Jared, is that traditional public relations, traditional journalism still needs to be followed. We still need the 5 W's. We need the H in there. We need, just messaging. But I create this idea of you also have to have like a social media style book, a digital media style book to understand that people consume this information differently nowadays.
Yeah, Pew Research says 86% of Americans will get their news here on a digital device.
Yep, there you go. That's an important stat.
Thanks for your time. Have a good year.
Oh, you as well. Thank you.
Bye. So, Melissa, when you look at 2021, what's your biggest takeaway for crisis communications and what people should think about going forward?
How poorly people are skilled and how we need a lot more vulnerability, acceptance and willingness for vulnerability in our crisis communication, in leadership, in crisis management.
So dig into that. How do you define that vulnerability in leadership?
So one of the crisis ready rules that has stemmed this year from 2021 and 2020 is that it is intimidating and uncomfortable, or something like that, intimidating and uncomfortable to be vulnerable in your crisis communication, but it's also relatable and trustworthy. And so what we see now in previous years, I think kind of historically speaking, we have leadership that has always feels the necessity to be like a true leader is very stoic. They're very assured, they're very reassuring, they're very stoic, right? There's no room to have emotion or to have vulnerability, to express vulnerability. And with the times changing, now the public is looking to leaders and are starting to trust more leaders who are willing to have that vulnerability. And it's a fine balance between being vulnerable, being reassuring, and providing hope. And so moving forward, the best leaders who will be able to lead, truly lead, and have people follow them through crisis are those who are willing to be uncomfortable. It's extremely uncomfortable and it's extremely intimidating. And it's uncomfortable, I think, really summarizes what it is to be vulnerable in combination with reassuring and providing hope.
Is this in part caused by the differences in behavior of generations? Leaders tend to be older, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials tend to want more in that way of empathy and emotion?
I think it's the evolution of, as well as with social media. Social media over the years, social media is a part of crisis, right? It's a form of communication. It's going to be a part of every crisis and every kind of viral issue. And it's opened the curtain to more of the behind the scenes to what reality is, or what is in reality. I'll give you an example. I remember in the summer of 2020, so like halfway through the year, I was consulting with a client of mine, and he's a very prominent leader in what he does. And I was trying to get him to be able to, I'm using the term vulnerable, but it's, in being vulnerable, you're not crying, right? It's not like going to the other end of the emotional spectrum, but it's being able and comfortable, willing to say, I don't have all of the answers right now. We don't have all of the answers right now, if that's in fact factual. But here's what we're doing, and here's what we're committed to doing, and here's how, right? So it's taking people on the journey with you versus coming across and feeling the need to showcase or to look as though you have all of the answers, when in fact that might not be true, or when that is not true. And so with this client, I remember leading him down this path and expressing these things to him. And he said, what you're asking me to do, Melissa, is to reveal the wizard behind the curtain. I can't do that. Like, no, you don't want to do that because that's uncomfortable, but that's precisely what you need to do in order to be relatable, and relatability is trustworthy. And the second he got past that fear boundary, that fear border of this is so uncomfortable, and right, the ego is telling you not to do this, and all these factors, he saw a drastic change in the way that he was able to effectively lead and connect on an emotional level with those he was trying to lead or needing to lead. And that's just one example.
Yeah, that is a really good example. I've often said to people that actually one of the best answers you can give when you're reading your statement to the media, or whatever statement you put out, is to tell what we don't know, and that we're going to wait for an investigation to tell us what happened, and how we keep it from happening again. And I find that not only is it, to your point, showing that you don't know everything, but it serves you well not to hypothesize or speculate about things. And it also gives you a place to retreat and repeat to in a media interview, that as the media try to pry into, or as your employees in the team meeting, I try to pry into causes, gives you a great answer to retreat to.
Absolutely. And it's real, it's authentic, it's legit, right? When it's legit, it's legit. And it also enables you, gives you the opportunity to lead, to rise to the occasion to lead. Because even if we look back to the start of 2020, when COVID just struck, and for the first month of COVID, we didn't have any answers, right? Every day was so highly volatile that every day we're getting new information. And it was so uncomfortable for the vast majority of leaders. And I sit at some very interesting tables globally. And I was sitting there realizing that even leaders need leaders. Like, everybody was looking to somebody to lead, but people in general, because of the way I think historically that we've raised leaders to be, which is that stoic, has all the answers, and very self-assured, that not knowing was so uncomfortable. And therefore everybody was looking for leadership. Everybody needed to be led, but leaders were scared to rise to that occasion because it was so uncomfortable for them. And in essence, it was, I'm uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable to stand up and say today something, when tomorrow they know that we're going to receive new information, and likely that's going to change our path from today. And how is that going to make me look? So that's that uncomfortable vulnerability piece. Meanwhile, when you're waiting for tomorrow became a week, it became a month, it became months. And there was this void and lack of leadership at the start of COVID for one of the reasons. And so moving forward, we need leaders to accept this, to realize this, to your point, to understand and to truly know that people don't expect you to have all of the answers at the start of a crisis. That's what crisis is. It's unprecedented. It's highly volatile. There's so many unknown variables that what they do want is they want to know what you know. They want to know what you don't know. They want you to be open and honest with them. They want to see that you're human and that you actually care. So there's that vulnerability and that emotional piece to it, right? That relatability piece. And to your point, if you say, here's what we know today, we may receive more information tomorrow. And if that's the case, that it changes our course direction, well, we'll change our course direction and we will keep you informed in that. And we'll tell you why and how, right? So now you're sitting there as somebody who's looking to a leader through crisis to lead you through crisis and going, that's somebody I can trust.
Those are great points. I really appreciate your time today. And we, of course, we have the Christmas tree behind you. So we hope you have a great Christmas and enjoy yourself. Thanks for your time with our group today.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. So as we come back live now, I'll give you my number one takeaway for 2021 and what you need to do for 2022. My number one is factual, fast, and no fluff. The idea that Molly hit on the phrase snackable. Audiences want snackable content. And I hit on the concept that according to Pew Research, 86% of the people get information from a digital device when there is breaking news. And if you really want to dig into this, look at last month's masterclass where we talked about changing the way you write. Too often, public relations people and communicators have spent too much time writing beautiful prose that they then bring into a command center and say, tell me what you think. And it gets marked up with the red pen and 3 hours pass before a statement goes out. That's unacceptable. I think as communicators, we need to recognize there will be times in our career when we can do great writing with prose. But when there is a breaking event, you need to communicate at the speed of social media. That means sentences that are bullet points written without commas. That's a writing style unto itself. For many of you, it would be a new writing style, but that's the thing I would tell you to focus on. That was one of the reasons I built Situation Hub, was I wanted communications at the speed of social media. And I know not everybody on the program knows about Situation Hub, and I'm not going to get into the details of it. But with Situation Hub, you've got the ability to write a news release in 3 to 5 minutes, which means that you're able to keep up with social media and that you're able to have pre-approved sentences, which make for pre-approved statements, which means that within minutes after the onset of whatever your event is, you get the first statement out, and then you come back with a second statement and come back with a third statement. So too many organizations are slow because they wait till they know everything before they say anything. But if you recognize that saying something beats the heck out of saying nothing, as long as it is factually correct, and what you don't know, to Melissa's point, you have, to use her phrase, the vulnerability, have the vulnerability or the openness or the transparency to simply say, we don't know everything, we're going to get more information for you, and come back in the next cycle and do more things. Bill, let me bring you in. Any observations on what you heard from either Molly or Melissa that you want to comment on?
Yeah, the crisis will be digital and leaders need to be more vulnerable. Those are kind of two key takeaways. I would argue that those are not new. I've been talking about those for 2 years, 4 years, 10 years in some context. And so it goes back to what I really think is the challenge. And Jared, I want to be cautious and not stay humble. The challenge is that the audience, the receiver of that counsel, isn't listening, isn't hearing it, and we are at fault. So how many of us have said the crisis is going to be digital? Now, and that obviously grows exponentially, but we've said that for years. And for some reason, our leadership, our clients, those that we support don't get it. So shame on us, because we're not saying it well enough, and they don't understand it. And then to be authentic, amen to Melissa. I think that's absolutely right. And it just goes back to the burden goes, the burden's back on us. We've got to do a better job of advocating and evangelizing those 2 points, which I think are brilliant points. But I think that it's on us. It's our fault. It's not their fault. It's not the leader's fault that they're scared and authentic. We've got to figure out as coaches and counselors and advisors, and we've got them to understand then the technology. So you could think about it. The tech is the hard skill, and then the soft skill is the vulnerability. So let me say it's a qualified amen, but the sinner is us. We got to figure out how to do a better job of coaching people through this on both of those axes.
Excellent. Let me share the screen, and I want you to join me, as a lot of the folks on the call and some of our regular followers have sent us their individual tips on social media. I'll share them, I'll read them, and then Bill, you can add any comments or observations if you think it's warranted. The first comes from Jill Wilmot at DTE up in Detroit. And she said her number one takeaway for the year is message as soon as possible with whatever information you have at that time. She says it's really important. It enhances and protects your reputation and lets your stakeholders know that you're committed to transparency. I agree with her 100%. Any quick observations there, Bill?
Speed kills. Speed has the potential to kill something that could really, really hurt you. And that's kind of what's embedded in here is just get fast as soon as possible. So my cheeky way of saying it is speed kills. And that's a great thing.
Okay. This one came from Singapore. Justin Fong over at A-Star said, in the era of social media, it's critical to seize the information narrative, and points out, of course, that truth matters less because influence seems to matter more on social media. And that kind of goes to some of the points we were talking about just a minute ago.
Yeah, I mean, again, maybe my role here is just to be the cheeky quip. Truth will set you free. Is that we've just got to do it. And I don't think that was Justin's point, was contrasting non-truth and truth. But I think we've got to do it, and you got to do it quickly.
Yeah, it's harder to make truth these days. It's just exhausting. Our old buddy Gary Sikich said, establish facts, speak truthfully, don't speculate. Number one lesson for those who have to address crisis communications. I love the fact that he emphasized the do not speculate. That is the wormhole that drives lawyers crazy, and their fear that your speculation will give fuel to plaintiffs' attorneys. And it's one of the reasons the vast majority of news releases get hung up somewhere between the second and third hour of that horrible approval process.
Absolutely. It's absolutely, nature abhors a vacuum, crises abhor a vacuum, but sometimes I'd rather live to fight another day and give partial information that I can rebuild, or that I can build on next cycle, next hour, next whatever. So yeah, that's, speculation is a challenge.
Absolutely. Let's see who we have next year. All right, up next. Oh, our buddy Jeff Carter. I've known Jeff for decades. He's now Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Public Affairs with U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. He says the public wants to know someone's on the scene, that somebody's in charge, and that they're taking action. And that information should go out almost immediately. I look back to the days when I was a reporter, and when we would drive up to the scene and no one came out to talk to us, our general feeling was, we're all going to die. Let's get out of here as soon as possible. Whereas our confidence and trust grew exponentially when there was someone there to greet us and to give us information, even if it was only partial information.
Yeah, so I had an ambassador when I lived overseas for a while and became friends with the ambassador. And she said to me, 90% of this job is showing up. And so I think just showing up in a crisis is I don't know if it's 90%, but it's certainly a big part of that role. And I think that's what that comment is all about, is it's being present.
All right, excellent. All right, we're going to go through the next few pretty fast so we can finish on time. Ashley McDonald, Public Information Officer, Rutherford, Tennessee, says her big lesson has been, don't get too comfortable and think things won't happen to my agency or my company or in my town. Things do happen. And the keys are to prepare, to anticipate, as many scenarios as you can. She talked about wild cards, but she wants to make sure everybody has their toolkit stacked with the tools they need, that they pre-plan with a crisis communications plan, and they've got pre-written messages designed. I'm going to move on and go to Ed Siegel. He says, don't assume anything. For example, don't assume that you'll never have a crisis. So this is very much like what Ashley was saying, or that don't assume that your crisis plan is up to date, or that you've practiced responding to every scenario. Don't assume that your team's going to work together. Don't assume that you have the resources that you need. And I would say that in his comments, he really makes a strong case for why you do media training, why you do drills, why you do vulnerability assessments, why you should have a regular calendar reminder to take your crisis communications plan out, read it, and update it. Too many people treat crisis communications plans like they are a static document, when in fact a crisis communications plan has to be a living document. All right.
Hey, Jared, what's that classic definition of assume?
Yes, an ass out of you and me. I guess we can say that here. There's no CBS censor to tell me I can't. Paul said communications is more difficult than ever because audiences are polarized. Christina Wright says process will save your life. She says even those that are developed for one-off situations during regular operations make decision-making easier. I agree. Your crisis communications plan needs to be that process. Your crisis communications plan should be the process by which you gather information, confirm information, and disseminate information. And that is filled with decision trees, and that it is practiced on a clear sunny day with your team so you can execute it flawlessly. And if you find a flaw during your drill, that's the time to fix it. Our final one comes from Katie Everett, Crisis Communications Officer at Novant Health over in North Carolina. She says, be sure to manage your time. She says it's easy to get in a crisis mode when the situation requires it, but it's equally important to step out of that mindset as soon as possible. Many people get into those crises, as she points out, and you just kind of get sucked into the vortex, and you need to get out and get your life back. So make sure, again, as you practice, that you're looking at all of this so that you can have some downtime and have enough team members to support you. All right, we're going to head into the home stretch here in the final couple of minutes. Let's just do a couple of housekeeping things. Bill, thank you so much for being a part of it. Melissa and Molly, I certainly appreciate you being a part of our discussion today. Your goals for 2022. I want you all to learn how to do vulnerability assessments, do them well, and do them once a month. I pointed out a year ago, now it's almost 2 years ago. Geez, time flies. But during COVID, you end up with crisis on type of crisis. You have a tornado with COVID. You have a hurricane with COVID. You have so many events. You have COVID with COVID. So do a vulnerability assessment once a month, get a team together and check to see what's new on the horizon. Make sure you have a crisis communications plan that works. If you need me to look at your plan, I'll give you a quick free peek. And by free peek, I mean, I'm going to look at your plan and within 10 minutes go, this isn't worth the paper it's written on, or my gosh, you've done unbelievable work. I can't believe how great you are. So I'll give you that reaction real fast. Pre-written statements, if you're not using Situation Hub, take a look at Situation Hub. It is the fastest way to write a statement. And I will say that Situation Hub has taken my crisis communications plans and turned the first 5 steps, first 5 chapters of that plan into 5 sentences. Make sure you set goals to train your spokespeople. And if you're the trainer, get the training you need and to do drills. Going into the new year, a couple of things I'll be doing, and I'll send you more information on this, is I'm going to set up a Situation Hub training company because a lot of you are starting to ask for Situation Hub for your clients. And so I'll create an opportunity because I know so many of my friends own their own PR firm. Some of them are like me, the only person in the firm. You're not like Bill, where you've got multiple people. So you want that bench strength. So we'll create an affiliate program for you to where you can provide Situation Hub for your clients, and then we'll teach you our training techniques so that you will be able to train your clients on Situation Hub. We're going to increase the number of the trainer courses that I'll take on in the coming year. For years, I never taught anybody my secrets. We're going to start doing that more. And then we'll accept candidates for a crisis communications class deep dive. A couple of people have said, hey, why don't you do a demo after this? So if you want a demo, stay on the call and we will do that. And as always, here is the link if you want to ask me questions off stage. Bill, you've got 30 seconds. Any final thoughts you want to add before we wrap up?
No, it's an exciting time to be a crisis communicator with all these tips. This should be just super easy and nobody should have to break a sweat in 2022.
Very good. So if you want to see Situation Hub in action, just stay on the call. For the rest of you, I hope you have great holidays. Take some time off, chillax, do a little planning for the coming year. Take some early time in January to do the planning that needs to be done. And in the meantime, I want you to be well, I want you to be safe, and I want you to be prepared. This is Gerard Braud. Thanks for being a part of our masterclass. We will see you in January. Take care.